welcome to the BullCast podcast. I'm Katie Pickler, and with me is Nicole Ellis.
Checking in.
And Cameron Spann.
Check, check, check. What's up, girls?
We go with this check business.
I don't know.
I mean, do y'all know something I don't know?
Yeah.
Probably.
I'm seeing the title of the outline.
Oh, yes. Check, check.
Court's not with us today. He's out of town.
No, Court's out of town. He is celebrating a family milestone, so he is not with us. So this episode is going to be check, check, check. Do people still write checks? Because I know I had to recently write several checks for Memphis Italian Festival. It is an organization that is raising money for a nonprofit, and so they wanted checks for everything. And so it was kind of like, okay, I got to brush the dust off my checkbook and write these checks and trying to remember how to write a check.
Abby and I share a checkbook, but it feels like a relic of the past. We write a check for our cleaners when they come in. We leave it on the counter, and that may be it.
Yeah, it's very rare, and I do have to pick on myself because I was in a hurry. It was a similar situation with a cleaner. We had used my in-laws' condo, and the rule is for family, like you just have to write the check for the cleaners. And so I had a check with me, which it was blank, but I hadn't signed it yet, which we're going to talk about that in a minute, blank checks and signing. I had it in my wallet, and I was like, oh, crap, I got to hurry up and write this check. And so I just wrote it for the amounts, and I was like $180, or I don't remember what it was, but like I just wrote $180. And I'm like, what? I look back at it, and like, because obviously now when checks are deposited, you see a picture of it. It shows you. And so I was like, what did I just write on here? Like I had like a brain fart.
Did I have a stroke?
What happened? What did I write on here? So it's kind of you're out of practice, which Nicole, did you learn how to write a check? I know
I did.
Okay.
But I don't own a checkbook. So.
Oh, okay.
But I do know how to write a check.
Yeah, we live in a new age of Venmo, which I'm very grateful for. But checks are important.
But then it kind of catches you off guard when someone's like, I need a check. And you're like, oh.
You suddenly forget how to spell and how to use your brain.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yes,
I can't just
spelling out numbers.
I can't just
Yes.
type numbers and be like, here you go.
And I don't carry a checkbook with me. It's like, that's what, like with this Italian festival, I had to like take a couple of checks with me and like just put it in my wallet. But I don't walk around with a checkbook at all times. But I vividly remember my mom always having her checkbook with her, writing checks for dance dues or whatever came up. And so it's just in balancing her checkbook out, which we'll talk about that in a minute. So before we get into the episode about checks and kind of the different kinds that are out there, because yes, there are more than just one type of check. And no, we're not talking about Hello Kitty checks versus Game of Thrones checks. Like there are different types of checks. So let's talk about movies that involve check fraud.
First on the list is a pretty obvious one, I think. Catch Me If You Can, which is directed.
Great movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Directed by Steven Spielberg, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio as a real-life con artist who successfully committed check fraud, among other scams, before being caught by the FBI.
And this is a musical now, right?
It is a musical.
Yeah.
We're going to go see it in a few weeks, right? I'm taking the crew.
All right, I guess we're going to go see it.
Cam, you and I were talking offline about this and how like you'd see him in this hotel room with like the toys trying to like make the checks.
Yeah, he'd have his like little, because he pretended to be a captain of an airplane, and he would have a little toy Pan Am, which was the big plane of the day. He would take off the sticker of the side of the little toy plane, and he would carefully affix it to the corner of the check. It's an art, to make it look legitimate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next one on this list, if you have been a listener of BullCast for a long time, you probably remember us talking about this, or me specifically talking about this movie a lot. I think Court would always get mad because he hadn't seen it. But Cam and I definitely grew up on this movie, and it's Blank Check.
So good.
Preston kind of is a loner. He kind of gets picked on, but he ends up getting this blank check. It is a check that is blank, but has a signature on it. And so, he ends up having this check and filling it out for a certain amount. And
I'm Googling images from the movie.
yeah, it was very interesting because he ends up kind of, unbeknownst to him, getting involved with a real life gangster. And so they're hot on his trail because they think this little kid is somehow involved. And he has taken this money, a lot of money, from this crooked criminal. And also it's lessons of when you give a little kid a lot of money, what do they do? Because he was 11, I think, in this movie.
Yes, and he kissed a 31-year-old in the movie.
Ooh.
Highly inappropriate. Oh, my word.
Wow.
Forgot about that one.
I just remember him getting the humongous tubs of ice cream and had the limo driver and all that.
Is that the one
stuff.
where he built the water slide out of his mansion?
Yes, which was awesome. It's like he's in his office and it's just somebody comes in and says something he doesn't want to hear. And so he just like gets in his slide.
So good. There was a whole era of movies. You had Dunstan Checks In and you had Richie Rich. Just these movies about kids with
Lots
a lot of
money.
money, which is really fun to watch as a kid.
Richie Rich having his own McDonald's.
Yeah, so good. All right, next on the list is a film called Paper Moon, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. This film features actually as a father-daughter duo, Ryan O'Neal and Tatum O'Neal, who con people during the Great Depression, including using fraudulent checks. Now, actually, Tatum O'Neal, the little girl, I think she was 10 when she filmed it, she went on to become the youngest Academy Award winner. I don't know if she still holds that title, but 10 is pretty young. I think she may still hold on to that.
I was not doing that at 10.
No.
Next on the list is Fun with Dick and Jane with Jim Carrey and Tia Leone.
That's funny.
It is good.
It is a
holds
funny
up.
movie. They star as a couple who turn to a life of crime, including check fraud after losing their jobs and their home.
And I think Jim Carrey's character, he loses, it's in the Enron crash,
it's like
isn't
an Enron
it?
stuff. Yeah, it was a big one for that. Okay, next one is American Hustle. So this is Christian Bale and Amy Adams as con artists who engage in various fraudulent schemes. Like they're doing a lot of stuff, but they also have check fraud.
They were hustling.
Hustling hard. Amy Adams was actually in Catch Me If You Can, wasn't she? She was young. She was the young Southern girl that he dated. Mm-hmm. All right, and last on the list is the classic Catch a Thief, directed by the Alfred Hitchcock, starring the Cary Grant as a retired cat burglar who is suspected of returning to his former occupation, including stealing and forging checks. Ladies and gentlemen, do not forge checks. That is very bad.
Nope, do not do it.
And I do want to mention, this is a shout out to Keiki, who is Court's daughter, who is also not here. Her favorite musical, which also won a Tony for Best Musical last year, Kimberly Akimbo, has a song called How to Wash a Check. And they steal this mailbox and they get a fishing line and they get the checks out of there and like wash it in solvent so they can take all the pen ink out. And she's like making high schoolers do this. It's kind of
holy moly.
Yeah, it's coming to Memphis next year, so
Okay.
we'll have to see.
Ooh,
we'll have to
that's
see that one too.
We should.
Okay, so checks still to this day remain a popular non-cash payment method. And there are different checks out there, which when Nicole brought us this outline, I was like, are there really that many checks? And then looking through this, I'm like, okay, I guess there are. But, because checks are used so infrequently now, it's just kind of one of those you don't really think about. And it's like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I vividly remember having my own little checkbook and we'd have to balance it. And like the phrase bounce a check, those are phrases that people don't talk about anymore. And we're going to talk about what it would mean to bounce a check and, keeping up with your check registry. And my mom still to this day, if she write somebody a check for their birthday, or a lot of times she'll write my husband a check reimbursing for like pork tenderloin if he like brings that to the family or things like that. And she will fuss at somebody like, I cannot balance my checkbook because you have not cashed that check yet. And so she's trying to, make sure it's there. And it's, is the check lost? Do you need to file a report? Or is it somebody just still sitting on a check and has it deposited?
It's easy to sit on a check. Well, in today's world, you can actually direct deposit from your cell phone, take a picture of it. But
it used to be you had to make a special trip. You had to get a check deposit slip. You had to fill it out, have your account number, all the bells and whistles. And so it wasn't just an easy. Now it's, okay, write for mobile deposit only, take a picture of it, both sides, upload it. And as long as you have a decent camera on your phone, you're good to go.
And the handwriting has to be good. That happened to Abby. She got a work check and the handwriting was terrible. And the app was like, we can't read this. You got to come in. It's like,
Oh, no. Okay, so I'll start it off. The first type of check is a personal check. So this is what most people know. This is where you, back in the day, probably had like your kid's picture or cats or flowers
your
or
monogram,
whatever it was. So it's bank issued. So it's associated with your bank account. And you've got bank information on there, account details, payee line. It's deposited at banks, credit unions, or check cashing services, and some fees may apply. Think about people that are taking their paychecks and going and cashing them at the liquor store. And so they're not going to get the full amount because there's fees associated with it. Because when someone is taking a check from you, a personal check, then they're just hoping it's a good check. And so typically this list says they're free, or you can order them online through your bank. I think you get a very small amount free, but now you have to pay, and there's no longer where you'll get a checkbook with 50 of them, or they'll send you a lot at once, and I think that's for fraud protection. But they're not free anymore. Like, I had to order some new ones because I was running out, because they don't give you that many, and they're expensive.
Yeah, and I think it's just because people aren't using them as much anymore, so it's not. I mean, they're going to charge you. Like, not many people need these. Personal checks were my first introduction to big boy money. Y'all probably have similar stories. When I was a freshman in high school, my mom got me a checkbook from Union Planters Bank, and she taught me how to balance a checkbook. Yeah, it was an important lesson for me. That was before debit card, credit card, all that good stuff.
It's important to know because you write it, and so I'll talk about right now with the bounce checks. Then that's a phrase that I know really well, but I think a lot of people probably don't know that nowadays. So if I wrote Cam a $200,000 check that is associated to my bank account, I'm giving it to Cam. If Cam goes and cashes it, I don't have $200,000 in my bank account. Mm-hmm. So then it's going to bounce because there are not sufficient funds. So then I'm going to get hit with, hey, you just wrote a bad check. Cam now has a check that is worthless, essentially, because there's not the funds there. And where a lot of the issue comes into play is like Palm Royale's a newer show right now. I think it's on Apple.
Kristen Wiig.
Yep. She has a checkbook, and she is just writing checks left and right to these nonprofits, to these galas, to these caterers, to all these people. And, it takes some time to process the checks. And so she's almost just writing, worthless checks, but to the people she's giving it to, they think it's real. Because at this time that this show is set, like, there wasn't that instant deposit. There wasn't that. So they're like, okay, I've already brought you all this food. I've done all my services. Now you've given me a check. We should be good. But they're not.
We're not good.
That stresses me out.
So, Nicole, tell us the next one.
So the next check on the list of checks is a cashier's check. How many times are we going to say check in this episode?
check.
Check.
This is a bank-issued check pre-printed with the amount and payee. And unlike a personal check, the funding is guaranteed by the bank. The funds are withdrawn upon issuance, and they are available at most financial institutions with some fees applying. So like I made an appointment to go get a passport, and I have to bring a cashier's check. So that means I have to actually go to my bank and get this.
Yeah, it's a little inconvenient. Mm-hmm. And recently I brought a cashier's check to Katie. I had from a settlement. I had funds in a CD at my bank. Those matured. It automatically transitioned to my checking account. So I had to go to the bank, and they had to issue me a cashier's check to bring to Pickler Wealth Advisors to invest. Yeah. So yeah, it was a pretty neat experience.
How it was is when we talked about bouncing. So these cashier's checks are backed by the bank. And so if it was to bounce, a cashier's check was to bounce, that's on the bank. Mm-hmm. Because the bank has said, no, I'm about to say the term for that. We're certifying. We are saying that, yes, that money is in our bank. Yes, this check is good. So someone nowadays, if they get a cashier's check or this next check we're going to talk about, it has a higher standard, and you feel better about taking those because there's been different steps that you've had to go through.
Right. Yep, great segue. The third type of check is a certified check. This is a personal check verified by your bank for sufficient funds, so like a cashier's check. The process is the bank verifies the account and holds the funds until the check is cashed. Similarities to the cashier's check: there are guaranteed funds withdrawn up front, and the fee is similar to a cashier's check fee. Now, if you're like me, you're wondering, okay, then what is the difference between cashier's check and a certified check? The use case is both ideal for larger purchases requiring guaranteed payment. And the cost, the cashier's check typically is cheaper than a certified check, minimal difference. As far as fund holding, the cashier's check, the funds are held by the bank, and with the certified check, the funds are held in your account, which is restricted.
Yep.
And this was a question I had because when I got my cashier's check, I didn't have to ever sign my signature, even when I gave it to Pickler Wealth Advisors. And it says the signing, the cashier's check is signed by the bank, which is what I went through, and a certified check is signed by you. And as far as appearance, both have security watermarks, but certified checks require your signature.
Yeah. When we're looking at the difference between the cashiers and the certified, there are certain places that will require that. Like when you go to buy a car, they're not going to just accept you writing a personal check for $20,000. Maybe they'll accept $100 or something like that, but they're going to want to have that extra protection of, you've gone to your bank, you've gotten this. And so there is going to be random times where you'll have that approval. Now, with everything, people can fake it. We know of a certain situation locally in Memphis where someone had a bad certified check and took it into a dealership and got a car, and it was a bad check. It was a really good fake check, but but it was bad.
Man.
And so, I mean, yeah, these are ideal for larger purchases. Typically, cashier is cheaper than a certified, but it's very minimal difference. As we talked about, the difference between where the funds are held, whether it's at the bank or in your account, who has to sign. Both of them have security watermarks. Because you think about when people, have you ever noticed at a grocery store or gas station or anywhere, like the $20 bill, $100 bill, they like lift it up to look for the line?
And they have a specific marker they strike through it with. Yeah.
So, I mean, same thing with this. There's different markers on it that's verifying that this is a legitimate check. I would imagine, if you won like the lottery or something, like you're getting like a cashier's check or a certified check. You're not getting just a personal check.
Yeah. And with checks in general, there's more legitimacy than cold hard cash. For example, when I did the town of Collierville's logo, which is it's a town, it's a government entity, I don't accept credit cards. And so instead of giving me cash, they mailed me a check because they can track it. It's more legitimate.
Yeah. Nicole, I think you were saying your grandmother still writes checks at Kroger?
She sure does. Well, not Kroger in Union City. It's a small grocery store. My mom also still writes checks at the Krogers.
At the Krogers. Okay. See, that shocks me because I've seen both parts. There's a lot of people that prefer a check. And like I've had some like contractors, we had AC work done and they said we'd actually prefer a check over credit card, which credit cards have a lot of fees.
That's right. Yeah.
But then obviously it's one of those of, I've been in situations where if you write a check, they'll have you write your phone number on it. And so they can call you if something goes bad with the check or things like that. And I mean, the thing is, what I will warn you, if you are writing checks, let's play this out. I have written Cam a check for $3,000 for doing graphic design work for me. I wrote him a check today. Now, Cam's got this check, but Cam goes on vacation. Cam comes back from vacation a week later. Check's still sitting there. So I'm looking at my bank account. I'm like, okay, yeah, everything's going great, whatever. And then Cam, 3 weeks later, decides to cash this $3,000 check. And if you have not built that into your budget, you're looking at it like, oh, I still got plenty of money. And then it's like, holy smokes, Cam must have cashed that check.
Yeah, you took quite a hit there.
You took a hit, and if you haven't, because you don't have checkbooks to balance anymore, most people, and I'll admit, I'm in this financial world, but I'll admit I'll fall into this sometimes. You look at your bank account balance, and that's your amount. Because everything is so immediate. You make a charge at the grocery store, it's coming out. Like, you have a credit card bill. Like, everything is instant, but those checks, somebody could sit on them for a long time. And so that's where you've got to be careful when you're writing checks to make sure you've built that into your budget. So it's not the day that your mortgage comes out, MLG&W, which for those who aren't local, that's the light, gas, and water. And, Cam's check now are all coming out on the 15th. And you're like, ooh, now I have no money until the 30th. So that's something to really consider when you're writing checks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And 10 or 15 years ago, it was common to see a majority older people, like in a grocery store line, writing checks, and it would kind of take time. That would be Nicole's parents and her grandmother. But you don't see it as often now. Or coupons, you don't see that as often. People taking their time shuffling through them. Yeah, it's all electronic, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah,
I will say they don't write a check every time.
Yeah,
but it's also like if you wanted to, give a graduation gift or something like that, then a gift card, somebody can steal it and use it. Cash, somebody can steal it. But the check, if it's written out to somebody, then it could get lost in the mail, but it's only good for that person. So it's harder for somebody to actually steal it. So I think in one way, the check is more protected if you were to send out a birthday or graduation or something like that. Like, I actually just remembered, I just put a check in the mail. Hey, that's another phrase, checks in the mail.
Yep.
Like, that's kind of a joke if you don't know that phrase of, oh, the check's in the mail, it's on the way. When people go like, where's my money? When am I getting it? It's in the mail somewhere. which literally I just put a check in the mail
Yeah.
to pay for t-shirts that I ordered, and their company is kind of funky and they either wanted a wire or they wanted a check. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing a wire of funds for, I mean, it wasn't a ton. So I was like, I will write a check. So now I've put a check in the mail and sent it. But if, it doesn't get there, then it's made out to this Boundless network. And so unless your name is Boundless Network, you can't cash it.
That's right. And paychecks, these days, it's not a physical check. It's usually just an automatic deposit.
Yeah, we still call it paycheck, but it's a pay deposit. Mm-hmm. And while I've got your attention talking about checks, every so often go and check your pay stubs, because a lot of people don't do that. And if you just log on, you can see it. You can just make sure, is the correct amount being pulled out for your 401k? Is the correct amount being pulled out for taxes, things like that? Because most people just know what hits their bank account and they're not looking at all the ins and outs. They're not looking at everything else. So just while we're talking about checks, go check that out.
Our listeners are probably like, why in the world are they talking about checks? But, our older listeners, they're used to it. But every day we get younger and younger listeners who are used to Venmo and everything. They've probably never even seen a check. So I think this is an important lesson when they hear the word check or they see one of these movies where they're writing a check. Now they know what they do. What's the purpose?
Yeah. It is a piece of paper that is, taking the place of cash, that's saying, here is my deposit to you, which, do we already talk about the fact that it's easier to use checks now because you can just do that mobile deposit versus having to drive to the bank? And so I think that checks are not going to go anywhere. I think we're still going to have them, but it's going to be kind of like when it catches you off guard that it's a cash only place. It's going to catch you off guard when someone says, we need a check, which is why it's important if you are in a position where you would prefer a check, or you're working for a nonprofit or whatever it ends up being, and you need a check versus credit card or cash, you better be sure to explicitly tell people that so they can prepare. Because I know I don't walk around with a checkbook, but I have a checkbook if I need it. I just need to know ahead of time because I'm not just going to have it with me.
That's your bullseye.
Yeah, bullseye is that. And then it's, understanding the different types of checks, what kinds you may need. Understanding if somebody does say you need a cashier's check or a certified check, where you need to go and how you need to get it. And then just being aware of, the legitimacy of these checks and understanding maybe why somebody doesn't want to take a check from you if it's a personal check, that they don't want to be burned by having a potential bounced check. So I feel like we've talked about checks enough in this episode. I think we've probably said check about 9,099,000 times.
All right, I'm going to go get a checkbook.
Get you a Taylor Swift one.
Oh, I will.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is the closing bell. Man, we miss Court. This is always his part. This is his part. Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of BullCast, the podcast. If you like what you heard and you'd like to find out more, head on over to our website. That is bullcastpodcast.com. On that website, you will find our bios. You'll see pictures. You'll be able to submit topics or guests that you would like to have featured on the show. Our podcast is on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and everything in between. So go there and subscribe so that the podcast is beamed to your device every single Thursday at noon. We are on the social media platforms, aren't we, Nicole?
We're on all of them.
Yes, we're on Instagram, we're on X, and we are on Facebook. That handle is @BullCastPodcast. Finally, we work at a place called Pickler Wealth Advisors. I don't know if we've mentioned it on the show today, but if you'd like to find out even more about us and more about our amazing team and our boss, David Pickler, head on over to picklerwealthadvisors.com.
That's advisors with an O.
Not an E.
That's correct. Advisors with an O, not an E. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've given you enough to go on and balance your checkbook and write that fun little memo line. So, for now, I'm Cam.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Nicole.
Bye-bye.